to manufacture. As you guys can see, Vlad is not currently with us. He is at a trade show in Chicago. He was here until about 30 seconds before we were ready to hit that go live button. I imagine he's going to work his way back on. And if he works his way back on, he will be down there below. If not, Caleb and I have a super exciting conversation for you guys. Before we go ahead and kick off, we want to do a couple of things. One, we want to thank Siemens, our sponsor up here, for sponsoring this theme, as well as, if you guys have somehow managed to miss it, I myself, Manufacturing Hub, and Vlad, who will be here in a moment, will all be over in Europe next week in order to be at SPS Nuremberg, right? I think it's probably the most exciting shows that I've been to over the course of this year. And it looks like we've got Vlad coming back on. So we'll go ahead and drop Vlad down here below. Vlad, I was just telling everyone, be at SPS Nuremberg next week. So Monday afternoon time, Germany, morning time, North America time, which is where almost everyone listening to this will be, we will have a event preview. On Tuesday, we'll have a day one recap. Wednesday, normal day, different time zone. We've got a jam-packed panel or kind of round robin late night show, Manufacturing Hub, that I'm not going to quite tell everyone who's going to be there, but you absolutely don't want to miss it. I did give Caleb a bit of a preview and introduction of some of the awesome guests that we're going to have and some of the great questions that we're going to be able to ask. And then on Thursday, we'll have a recap. In between those, Vlad and I have two presentations, and they've got a bunch of what they call running reporter, where we get to go try to ask questions in 5 minutes. If your question, like Vlad, is how are we supposed to get anything done over the course of 5 minutes, you guys should tune in as well, because that will be super interesting to watch. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new here, we try to have a very active chat and be able to go have questions and conversations with everyone. I see Vlad is dropping a couple of comments in the LinkedIn chat. Please go ahead and feel free to drop comments. We will try to go ahead and bring those comments into the show as time and space kind of allows. I will say if there are a bunch of technical questions, we're typically going to hold those off till after and then be able to go ahead and dive back into those after in the post show. I will also say, if you guys are watching on LinkedIn, we've had some strange instances on the LinkedIn where we don't get all of the chats, and sometimes I see them on the phone, but they don't show up on the restream where we are here. So if we don't get to all of your questions and comments, hello everyone, thank you for being here. I am sorry if we don't get those. We will 100% get to you guys after the show. But without further ado, everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave. This guy down here is Vlad. We are on episode 143, and we would like to welcome back Caleb Eastman to the show. Now, if you guys are longtime listeners, you might have seen Caleb on episode 66, where I think we started talking about, I feel like we're going to just continue to take the conversation absolutely to the next level. But without further ado, Caleb, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Caleb. I think our conversations, including the ones off stream, are extremely interesting. I know that you're working in a number of directions that include edge, AI, machine learning. And so I think that the conversation today is going to hopefully hit on some of those topics, probably not as much detail as we've, like I said, discussed off stream, but I'm certainly very excited on how that's going to look like in the manufacturing industry in the years to come. But before we get there, could you give us a bit of a reintroduction of what you do in the automation space and ultimately what it is that you are working on today?
So I'm the co-founder, CEO of Winds Robotics, and we also have a division called Winds Technologies. But essentially what we do is we help companies who are trying to implement an edge strategy at scale either in their facility or if they have a distributed architecture, essentially working through everything from, in particular, the networking and the firewalls and communications, and basically the whole stack. Layers 1 through 8, if you will. It's a really bad explanation of what we do, but that's the best I can do right now.
Well, I was going to say, so Caleb, we will get into it a little bit more in the coming minutes. But Vlad and I recently, a couple of months ago, did a live build with Siemens, and one of the things that we got to play with was the Industrial Information Hub and Industrial Edge. And as we were doing this, you were sending us messages saying that kind of one of the things that you guys at Winter Winds Technology does is you guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're the only North American solutions partner for Industrial Edge and the ecosystem, and you guys are in combination of actively deploying and going through the process of helping new customers deploy. Is that correct?
Right. So I can't say definitively we're the only ones presently. I'll say that we're definitely very, very early on as a solutions partner here in North America. And yes, we do help people implement Industrial Edge, especially the hairy parts of the IEM v2, which is a Kubernetes cluster, and kind of setting that up.
No, perfect. I think that's super interesting.
Caleb, if I can
go ahead, Vlad.
If I could follow up on that, because I want to dig into that a little bit, right? So Caleb, are you helping customers deploy Industrial Edge as a platform to then run other applications? Do you also deploy other applications for them, or sort of that's managed more on their side? And ultimately, I also want to ask you about the nature maybe of some of those applications, right? Because I think when Dave and I did that demo, a lot of emphasis was placed on extraction of data from controllers. Is that what you're helping manufacturers do, or is it going to be a bit more advanced image processing, AI, machine learning? I guess what's the scope of what they're running on those edge platforms?
So so the first thing we do is we help people get Industrial Edge into their infrastructure in whatever way works best for that organization. But then, yes, we usually will help them select the Industrial Edge apps that are most applicable to their scenario, that are already in the App Store, and then we also will augment those apps. Industrial Edge has two types of apps. What I call connector or adapter apps, which is basically communicating with the controller, and then the other app are applications that once you have the data into Data Bus and Data Service, how it can meet the use case of the customer. What problems are the customers trying to solve?
As a follow-up to that, Caleb, so I guess if I understand it correctly, and I guess that's what I would like to find out a bit more, what's the selling point for the customers that you're deploying Edge to versus, doing it, let's say, bare metal, or deploying it natively by their teams? So is it the idea of getting that data? Is it the idea of transforming the data? What exactly are they looking for?
So honestly, the interesting thing about Industrial Edge that I found is that everybody seems to have a different reason why they are looking for a solution like this right now. Some people are trying to offload compute cycles on their PLCs. Some people are looking to implement a maintenance program for their machines. Some people are really just wanting to have a more flexible application architecture. So for example, what Industrial Edge, from my perspective, is really good at is day two operations. So if you're deploying arbitrary applications onto a control system, how does the staff, the factory floor staff, be able to see what applications are doing what and manage them, even though without having to know a lot about Kubernetes or Docker containerization or anything like that. So it's a really great management platform for containerized applications, essentially.
Absolutely. And can you maybe expand on one or two of those examples of where you're seeing interest because it is so diverse, Caleb?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Essentially, there's a whole lot of stuff that there's a whole lot of problems. There's a whole large problem space that that has generally been unsolved from an industry perspective as it relates to manage to both integrating systems together, whether it's IT, OT systems, or getting beyond what I call the node red stage, essentially, where it's just you might have a Modbus driver and node red and MQTT, and you're trying to wire things together, but really, pretty much everybody recognizes that to scale requires integration with OT staff, et cetera. But specifically, some use cases that we're addressing is, along the lines of what Industrial Edge strengths are today. So Industrial Edge has a heavy component around condition monitoring, being able to implement a maintenance program. There's a really great application called Machine Monitor that I really like. Or where you're trying to integrate the maintenance ticketing with the cycle counts that come from live data, whether it's so for example, how if you're trying to implement a maintenance program where you want every time the valve cycles, let's just say 1,000 times, you want someone to grease it. Well, that requires integrating a maintenance or task order system with the live data that comes from the control system, and that's the kind of thing Industrial Edge is really good at. And so it's a really interesting way to sort of gather your data up, organize it really well, and then be able to act upon it along some specific verticals. So.
And Caleb, if I can maybe take us a step back, right? Because I think the goal isn't necessarily to just discuss Industrial Edge as a specific solution. I think that there's maybe an importance to discuss the transformation that we're seeing. And in my opinion, at least, and that's the question that I would like for you to elaborate on, it's easier than ever to deploy IT solutions onto the OT side, right? So ultimately, that's kind of what we're seeing when it comes to a lot of these technologies. Is that what you're also thinking Industrial Edge brings, or is there maybe a different way for someone to look at on the manufacturing side of what is happening when it comes to these solutions?
So essentially the life cycle of IT projects, whether it's Kubernetes or software-defined networking or Docker itself, or usually is the tool is made and the platform or the infrastructure is created, but it's very difficult to work with, and so a whole bunch of tooling gets built up over time around it. That's probably, since you're at KubeCon, you're probably seeing a lot of tooling conversations around Kubernetes, and and so in the life cycle, it usually is okay. There's some static deployment tooling and some orchestration tooling. And then after that, it's more dynamic deployment tooling and orchestration tooling. And so essentially every time we have a step change in infrastructure, whether it's like virtual machines to containers to unit kernels, that all that stuff has to build up around it essentially. And so right now we're in the building tooling for containers phase. And I said industrial edge is a very it's a lot of the tooling that you need to implement containers well, kind of placed together and with really nice API and really nice different ways to interact with it, whether it's command line or user interface. So I consider it, it's a really nice, containerization for OT essentially. And it's hard to describe. The things that it does is very complex under the hood. And so it's kind of like I said, it's kind of like, we talked the last time about IO-Link. For IO-Link to work well, it's very, very complex under the hood for it to be simple to the end user. And that's essentially what Industrial Edge is doing to containers. This, by the way, obviously, I'm a person who's just describing it as a user and an implementer of the system, not someone who's involved in making it. So this is just my interpretation of what it is.
Let me ask you a question, I guess on that side, because I think the conversation when it comes to any of these tools across different verticals, right, not just manufacturing, becomes should we be building in-house or should we be purchasing an off-the-shelf solution, right? And I think that the idea is that ultimately in almost every instance, you could technically, let's call it, buy a server and then implement your own containers, implement your own orchestration engine, ultimately create observability stacks. But at what point, let's say in manufacturing, would that not make sense? And in my opinion, at least, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you have a very strong software background, right? Which many factories don't necessarily have. But is there a case, in your opinion, where it would make sense?
So there's so much to good container infrastructure that it is, I can definitely see what I tell people is, especially for what it costs, is kind of a no-brainer if you're gonna. So I have a hard time saying there are scenarios where Industrial Edge is not better than just doing, just rolling your own container solution. And I've done it a few times, several times. And the main reason why you might is that currently Siemens doesn't run applications on Kubernetes. They're run on edge devices, and the app store is basically Kubernetes. So if you were trying to run pure Kubernetes in your infrastructure, then that might, I know that they're going to work IAM extensions. So that's something that you guys are going to hear about before I do, because you're going to be SPS. But that, I'm trying to think of other scenarios in which just getting out container, or I suppose if you're trying to use infrastructure that's different, for example, if you wanted to do unit kernels as an example, Industrial Edge is very much about containers. So if you're implementing other converged infrastructure methodologies, like if you're a Beckhoff user and you're doing TwinCat, and those are the kinds of scenarios where I can see it makes sense to avoid a solution like Industrial Edge. But yeah, it's kind of hard to think of any right now.
Oh, the Beckhoff example, it's because they run on Windows, right? They run on some kind of a modified OS, but it's Windows based.
No, Industrial Edge is it's Industrial OS is a Debian Linux.
Right. I meant on the backoff side, right? You wouldn't want to mix, like, if you have backoff like controllers, it
Oh,
might not work
I
well.
was thinking of what do they call it? Twin Cat. It's
Hmm.
they have an OS image. It's like it's actually a BSD. And so they have to use, like, if they want to do containerization, they have to use pots and jails, and like it's a whole different. It's a very different way of thinking. And so yeah, that would none of that would work with Industrial Edge if you were trying to manage the BSD image kind of from like from back off or something. But again,
Gotcha.
that's a yeah, that's a whole different thing. If you're doing that, then you're doing that already.
Right. Dave, what are your thoughts?
I think it's interesting, but before we dive in much further, Caleb, we've talked about a bunch of different operating systems. We've talked about containers. I think we mentioned Docker, right? We mentioned Kubernetes. We mentioned a bunch of these things. And as we were having this conversation, and as we see KubeCon going on behind Vlad, I was thinking to myself, I don't think it's been more than maybe 5 or 6 years until I heard kind of anyone 5 or 6 years ago before I really heard people in any sense and shape and volume talking about this in the OT space. And I feel like 5 or 6 years ago, it was a bunch of testing and things like that. And while I know that they are historic, we'll call them IT tools, right? Tools that basically run infrastructure and everything else and are known good. Uh, I guess before we dig deeper into applications and things like that, I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts and the conversations that you've been having with IT users, with OT users about these types of tools. And if you're finding pushback from any of these groups, or we've just kind of come to accept these tools can be used on the production.
So yeah, okay. So the depending upon kind of it's obviously it's pretty muddy because there we've kind of, I would say we're on the tail end of the VMware phase that OT has been in for a while now, and all of the tooling and all of the all of the skill sets that people have built up around that particular type of infrastructure. Um, so it's kind of a brand new world with containers for a lot of people. I found this it's still pretty new to a lot of corporate IT people. So a lot of the corporate IT people are more familiar with VMware. Containers and Kubernetes tend to be the province of, Google created Kubernetes for their converged infrastructure so that they can move workloads around on nodes a lot easier, slicing up the Linux namespace. But but the so the it's kind of like you actually will see pushback from some corporate IT people about using containers because they are still more familiar with VMs, and there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around Linux. Honestly, a lot of people are concerned about Bash and command line interfaces and things like that, and all of this, in containers in particular, are very, very, very complex from a networking perspective. The way that you have to think about networking and how it's so I would say that as it relates to corporate IT and OT, and corporate IT and corporate OT, they it's usually fairly similar fears around new infrastructure. Then where IT starts to head are questions around certificate management at scale, or secrets management, PKI, firewalls, and how and in particular, one of the most interesting ones is, so in the corporate IT world, they don't like it if you encrypt communications end to end, because they can't see and they lose observability. So what you have to do is you actually have to have a place where you decrypt the encryption, and then have a monitor, that some kind of flow monitoring tool, whether it's Nalzomi or Azure IoT Defender or whatever, and then you re-encrypt. They call this this is a big thing that happens in corporate infrastructure a lot, and it's a big thing that IT tends to worry about. So even just the act of having encrypted payloads or encrypted messages, like the OPCUA certificate that encrypts it, you have to decrypt it. You have to decrypt all that, so that it's visible to the observability tools, and then you can re-encrypt it essentially. So those are the kinds of things that you tend to deal with IT. OT, it's they basically, I've found that they basically just want you to answer the IT people's questions. They want the green light from IT, because what they're trying to do is solve a problem. And that, and a lot of times it's really interesting. Like, there's a lot of projects that are, computer vision based, so the OT personnel tend to be, either more concerned about physical hardening, so more about the hardware, and they're very concerned about making sure that all the IT boxes get checked.
Let me ask you like a follow up on that, Caleb. And I guess I want to say predominantly on the OT side, as you've explained a little bit, like one of my fears is that as we get access to all of these tools, there's, how to say it, it also becomes a challenge of figuring out how to properly set them up on the OT side, right? And what I mean by that more specifically is, as an example, let's say like I understand, because I've programmed PLCs for many, many years, that it would be difficult to, even if you have the possibility to run, let's say, a JavaScript application at the edge, to try and do controls with, let's say, just very basic JavaScript. You could, right? Like, again, I'm not saying that it is not possible, but I feel that there's going to be maybe a greater opportunity to fall into these traps, especially for teams that are maybe not as OT savvy. And so I guess like the concern for me is that we will introduce a lot of possibilities, but many of those possibilities could also be misused per se. And I think there was one example that we discussed on stream, which is more of a networking example with Josh, right? Where I want to say traditionally IT firm implemented a lot of the network architecture for a company, and the OT side, quite frankly, could not handle those payloads and those settings, and thus ended up not being adequate for that customer. So I'm a bit worried that the same might happen on the software side. And I'm curious, like, what your perspective is on how do we maybe have those guardrails in place while we maybe deploy these capabilities.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic. So some of the guardrails are implemented by, this is one of the things that Industrial Edge does help you with, is creating some guardrails around the application, around how the application interacts with the other applications, and with the at the lower layer systems. And there's a lot of controls around who has access to what data, who can write data back to what, et cetera. From a and that's a big aspect of what it is that I would say as it relates to, there definitely does need to be some definitely does need to be some uh, uh, guardrails around it. Luckily, there are industries that are, as an industry, are a little bit further ahead than industrial automation as it relates to, I'll call it the automation to autonomy sort of progression. One of them is cars. So if you look at the rules for what is allowed to be on an ECU, right now it's C, and there's a working group implementing Rust. So there's guardrails that you can follow. There's definitely things you could look at. Like, so I would say that if um, if the if the software defined vehicle people or the people who are working on the libraries for cars wouldn't do it, then it's not good for industrial automation either. Because in general, it's all the same things around safety and determinism guarantees and reliability and things like that. So a good rule of thumb is, I would say a good rule of thumb is if you're in the OT network, you should follow the you should understand what industries who are dealing with software defined automation, software defined autonomy, what they would do in this scenario. And so that's a decent a motto I have for myself is that and I probably said this last time too, is I hate to innovate out of ignorance. So it's a very big deal for me to understand, okay, for any type of problem around device management or application management or data management or device, application orchestration, there's several groups of people that don't talk to each other, funnily enough, that the most robust solution tends to be from the group that has to deal with that problem the hardest. So, for example, with the software defined, I talked about the software defined vehicle people or the autonomous car people. They are not that great at dealing with heterogeneous devices and integrating multiple devices, because they have full control over the stack all the way to the ECU. They get to choose even what chips they use and what they will make their own computers generally. And so what they're good at is very, very robust determinism, and also simulation, and they're the best at deploying AI, artificial intelligence, in a system where the artificial intelligence has direct control over the control system. Like there's not a human in the loop between the AI and the controls of the car. And so they make these massive data pipelines, and they typically open source them too. You can go see, what a lot of them do. And there's also they have their own standards bodies and open source implementations of those standards and things like that. The people who tend to do really well at, so there's another group that doesn't talk to anyone. is what the Matter group. That's the people who work on home IoT devices. What they're really good at is integrating heterogeneous, made by lots of manufacturers, and also easy setup and easy management because their end user are consumers. So I can name all 5 of the groups if you want that I follow that I watch and see what they're doing, but it's for any one problem there are people that have gotten at least a good head start on solving that, and so I usually try not to invent something new until after I've done my research and have at least identified what at least 1 or 2 of these groups are doing.
But these groups are in, if I understood correctly, in the home automation / like IoT space. They're not in manufacturing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what I do is I group these people by what conferences they go to and what standards they're writing. So the home automation, home IoT group, that's your Matter. That's the they used to call CHIP. There's the building controls and automation. That's a group. There's the I call it the mobile robotics and autonomous car group, or the otherwise known as the Ross crowd. And there's the data center group. So that's the Open Compute Foundation. And then there's the obviously the industrial automation, and then I typically break it into 2 different groups. Either you're someone who deals with highly centralized facilities or highly distributed facilities, and those two groups tend to also approach things a different way.
I think it's going to be really interesting, right? Like what's going to come to the manufacturing space, right? Like when you're talking about, let's say, like closed loop systems that can learn and then, let's say, adjust certain parameters. I think it opens up a lot of doors. And I personally have some ideas on how that can be used. But at the same time, there's the question, and again, I don't want to take us down that path like too deep. There's the question of the regulatory statutes that will then start like limiting what happens when, let's say, like that loop is adjusted on a safety device, right? Because at the end of the day, we're almost in a similar scenario like self-driving vehicles where lives are at stake if something is adjusted, if something is operating a little bit differently because there is an edge solution that is adjusting those parameters for the operator, right? So it becomes an interesting question, at least in my mind.
Yeah, well, that's a whole that whole topic is probably what I've spent the most time thinking about of anything. Is the what does it look like? What does it look like at scale to do closed loop control, where the agent of where the agent that makes the decisions on set points and things like that are not a human, but some kind of artificial intelligence, or and it's something that is like, in order to save people's souls, I will not go into it right now, because it's kind of the end game of all this. I definitely spent a lot of time thinking about it, too much time thinking about it, and so I probably, it's not a 101 course. It's not a 101 conversation.
That's fair. Dave, what are your thoughts?
I think it's really interesting, Caleb, right? And I really like your comment, I think, again, for the second time, about how your goal is to not reinvent something. And what I find is time and time again, honestly, too many times, we see, 5 groups come and invent a quote unquote invent something that is really similar, kind of over the course of 24 or 36 or 48 months. And then it is this mad dash to trying to figure out who is going to be right and first to market. So I completely agree. If there are other smart people out there thinking about things, and if there isn't some sort of critical flaw with those thought processes, it doesn't make sense to go reinvent everything every single time. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for kind of a couple of those groups that you had listed. I do need to slightly transition this conversation because we've got some people to thank. So we want to thank Siemens for sponsoring this theme, as well as bringing Vlad and I a manufacturing hub to SPS Nuremberg next week. If you guys missed that at the very beginning, that is what Caleb and I were talking about briefly. So with Siemens, accelerate transformation for industrial production is what Siemens is all about for during SPS Fair 2023 in the beautiful city of Nuremberg in Bavaria, Germany. Now, both Vlad and I are featured guests and co-hosts. We're super excited to go be part of it and bring it to everyone who is currently watching. So we will have daily shows. So Monday we'll do a preview. On Thursday, we'll do a grand finale. On Tuesday, we'll have a recap. On Wednesday, we've got a manufacturing hub show that is absolutely jam-packed. That's what we were doing, I guess, today on the normal East Coast side, and this evening over in Europe is going and getting everything prepared for that just an hour or two ago. So we are super excited for that, as well as a couple of other presentations on some other things that we're doing. If you guys are attending in person, come by, say hi to Vlad and I, or learn about some advanced solutions that are transforming manufacturing across the globe. There's V19, there's the virtual PLC, there's Industrial Information Hub, and a whole bunch of other things that we've talked about here, talked about in the past, and we're super excited about. I will say Siemens is the entirety of Hall 11. So you come in and I think you take a left, and it is the entire hall, which is super exciting. Watch our stage presentation as we discuss modern architectures for IT OT environments and hyper local solutions in a global economy. If you can't attend in person, no worries. Siemens will be streaming all the stage presentations so you can watch them or catch the recording on from the comfort of a more reasonable time zone for all of our normal North American listeners. Guests can get their tickets for free and in person. Check out siemens.com/SPS Fair. We'll go ahead and drop that link below. Or access the virtual event by registering. And thank you to Siemens for sponsoring the episode, for bringing us here, and for come over the course of the next week. Now, Caleb, I want to go bring us back to the previous conversation we had with you in episode 66. And as all our longtime listeners know, I asked people for career advice. And I think Caleb gave some of the most unique career advice that he distinctly remembered as we were getting ready for this, is if you want to be in this industry, go be a social worker or go do something like that. And you kind of teased it out, and here we are 80 episodes later. And I want to talk a bit about the soft skills, right? And I think that at the core of go be a social worker, learn how to deal and work with people was the need for soft skills. But I want to hear more about this. So would you mind extrapolating on that?
Yeah. So I would say at Winter Winds, we're pretty opinionated about this particular topic. So the president of the company is a former teacher and is a curriculum designer for, and I'm a former social worker. And what we found is that particularly now, where you have two things happening. Number one, you have the IT/OT convergence, and that means that you're going to be explaining a lot of things to people that they will be less familiar with, and you'll be having to interact with people, a much broader set of people than you do if you're just doing, say, a PLC project. Because when you're delivering solutions that span IT and OT, you will find yourself explaining Profinet to IT people. You'll find yourself explaining Kubernetes and Docker to OT people. You'll be explaining what what the benefits of the system is to executives, and oftentimes you have to be really good at reading the room, as it were. So, for example, I'm well aware that I butchered most of the things, and that kind of awareness is how you're coming off to other people is an important skill to understand, because so much is missed in delivery. And so I think that one of the most important skills is to understand how you appear to others when you're talking, i.e., is what you're saying landing? Are you explaining it on the right level? I really like the explaining the same thing from everyone, to a 6-year-old, to a postdoc or a PhD, an expert in the field. That is, you will do that all the time if you're implementing converged ITOT solutions, because oftentimes there's not that many people on the planet who currently serve as ITOT glue. And so if you find yourself in that role, you have to be very, very good at, like I said, determining whether or not, like, the meeting that you just had was like, did how many of the people integrated what percentage of the information that you gave. And when they're asking the question, it's important to understand why are they asking that question? Are they asking that for them? Or are they asking it because they have stakeholders they have to answer to? And so essentially, I would say that, soft skills and speaking skills are both necessary, very necessary, if you're going to say, if you want to put Kubernetes in an OT environment. There's a lot of people that you got to explain why you're doing it, how it's done, how they manage it, what happens if it breaks, and you have to understand that there's a lot of people, especially in the big organizations, there are a lot of people who are not are they're not bought in. Oftentimes, nowadays, when I see, like, people wanting to do AI and control systems, it's usually driven from, like, the executive layer, the executive group, or the innovation team, not someone who runs operations. So oftentimes, if you're implementing this, this thing they want to do, you're having to hit square on with people who would rather not do that, don't want to do it. And so you have to be cognizant of that. And so, like I said, it's important to know kind of how, like I said, I watch body language really quickly, very closely in meetings. And I try to figure out when people are checking out and things like that. So,
Caleb, if I can follow up on that, how would you recommend, I guess, an engineer who's maybe realizing that they lack those skills to build them up, right? Are there any workshops? Are there maybe any books? Are there ways to practice? Because I think a lot of times it's very difficult to close that loop, unlike technology, right? Like technology, I can just, well, like I'm kind of seeing that I program a PLC faster. I can generally kind of gauge that the projects are going better. But on this maybe like human level, it is a little bit more difficult to do.
so actually, I think that so again, this is, not innovative ignorance. The best, all the best books and stuff that I've ever read on this subject come from education. So teachers have to teach a subject to a wide variety, a group of people that are in different places in life, that have different backgrounds, have different levels of understanding of different subjects. That is a very different scenario than, say, PLC training, where you're doing TIA portal. Everyone who shows up either knows what an S7 is or like probably. But in formal education, especially I think elementary education, you have to so specifically I would say I will have to I will send you a list of books from but but it there are some really interesting stuff around that, and honestly I can't think of anything specific off the top of my head that's like this is the one thing you should do. Like I said, I came by it fairly organically, um,
Mhm.
and so I don't really know the best formal way. Again, this is something that I actually need to ask Valerie, the president of our company, about. She's like she's curriculum designer. This is all they think about is how to get the information across the to people who are coming at it from from a myriad of different scenarios. So.
Sure. That makes sense. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I guess I love everything you're saying, Caleb. And we look forward to kind of that list from your side. But let me ask. So I know that you work with a bunch of engineers, right? So internally, and I'm sure externally, if someone is a degreed engineer and has worked in an engineering role, is there or maybe a couple of pieces of general advice or things that you would suggest to them so that they can kind of start working on those soft skills? Because what I find is that most people who work in an engineering role have been engineers for an extended period of time and don't have the ability, that they don't have the luck to be a social worker, to be a teacher, to be something else, who you're almost forced to go learn these soft skills because the things people are saying may or may not be the things that they mean.
I would say the number one thing I would start with is um, start is always make sure that you know yourself and you know what your predisposition is. You know what things will shut you down, as an example,
Mhm.
or what like so because if you have a strong awareness of yourself and what your blind spots are, I would say go look for your blind spots. You have some, everyone does, and it's important to know those blind spots because typically, a lot of innovation is a discomforting thing, and it requires constant learning. And I
Mhm.
found that usually the people that struggle the most with change are engineers because they they'll want to innovate, they might want to do new things, but they usually don't want to learn a lot about, like, for example, one of the hardest things to do to get a software engineer to do, for example, is to really study a open source library and do more than just a basic, integration with it. Like, I don't know how many people understand how to really, really go in depth with MQTT, for example, or how to really, really leverage InfluxDB. So a lot of people have very strong opinions about this, but very few people probably have the depth of understanding necessary. And so I would say, like I said, know what your blind spots are, know what your weaknesses are. That's number one. Then number two is uh, when you're talking in a room, always watch people's body language. So if you're giving a presentation, for example, you don't look at the slide. You don't look at it. You should be looking at other people. And if it means that you have to do more prep work to like memorize, whatever, so you just glance at the slide. But because that you, all the time. There's several times where I will just stop. I'll just I'll skip over slides. I'll throw slides out. I won't do a PowerPoint presentation. I've made a rule for myself about if I have to get out PowerPoint to explain someone why they should have industrial edge, I've failed. Because a PowerPoint because for something as inexpensive as that is, it should be pretty easy to get someone to pilot it, right? Or use it in their automation lab or something. If you're having to do a whole 40 thing slide deck, like you did something wrong. You either did, so I have that same rule around Linux and, Docker and things like that. There's certain things where you should be able to explain it well enough to someone that it's just a no-brainer to them, that you don't have to have a big. So that's one thing. That's kind of my rule is I always try to avoid the PowerPoint presentation when I can, because it's usually should be reserved for somebody, you're supporting somebody who wants the solution and they need help explaining it to others versus introducing it for the first time to that organization. So like I said, it's sort of a nuanced thing, but yeah.
Okay. I like that. And I really want your 2-sentence explanation on why industrial edge. But I'm going to give you 90 seconds to think about that, Caleb. Got a couple of comments kind of on top of your comments in regards to soft skills, right? So I also agree that they're super important. I think that most of the people watching this are on the technical side. Of things. I guess I've got a couple of suggestions, if you will. Is one to Caleb's earlier point. With soft skills, you're going to continue to rise in your organization, and you're going to have to be able to talk to people whose background is not the same as yours, right? So if you're an engineer, you're going to have to talk to more than just engineers, more than just engineering managers. You're going to have to go talk to people who have general business degrees, who've got very little technical background. You're going to have to go explain things to people that look at everything like it's an accounts ledger from the financial side. At some point, you may have to go explain things to directors and vice presidents and other executives who really don't want the 70-page summary of something, but they really want to know why it's important to them. And if you can do it in less than 90 seconds, that's all the better. So I would say going and practicing those skills, meeting and networking and having conversations with other people, absolutely super important. I'm going to throw out a way overused book on a couple of the podcasts that I listen to. It's almost a joke at some points, but I, a number of years ago, rented Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People as an audiobook. And I listened to it a couple of times, and I think there are some interesting aspects from it, despite the fact that it was originally written, approximately 100 years ago. But going and having conversations with people, I think is absolutely important. And again, to kind of put a nail or a pin in the soft skills are important. They are what will allow you to advance or allow you to not advance in your career. And they are only becoming more and more important the every year as it goes beyond. So thank you for bringing that up, Caleb. I'd like to come back. I know we're putting you a bit on the spot, but you said if you have to pull out a bunch of PowerPoint slides to explain why industrial edge, you feel like you have failed to some extent. So if someone comes to you and says, Caleb, why should I use industrial edge? What is typically your response with that?
Well, what I say is I'll edit it a bit. I'll say why they should evaluate. So a big determinant in OT for me, for software is if you want to evaluate software, and will they let you just trial the software, install it on your own? You don't have to have multiple conversations. You don't have to beg them to give you so Industrial Edge is in a state where for $500, which is the cost of an IEM and one IED, a virtual device. It's around $500 basically for that. You get a whole lot of infrastructure that is kind of necessary to deploy containers at scale. So if you want to do anything innovative that allows you to take a Linux computer and deploy, it doesn't matter what it is you're trying to do. I mean, the industrial edge is better than doing it from scratch. And if you look at the $500, on average, a corporate meeting where someone's giving a PowerPoint presentation for an hour and a half probably costs that company more than $500.
Mm-hmm.
If you spend more than 2 or 3 days thinking about it, if you spend more than a couple hours reading about it, with how much people in this industry cost by salary, one thing I like to do is break my time down into what it costs per hour, me, right? And it's, to me, for the fact that you get the software, you can trial the software, it's really inexpensive to get started, and it allows you to install it. It's very portable, so they let you install it in your own infrastructure. I don't know why you wouldn't look at it. Really, I don't know why, really. Because it's a big, like I said, it's a big thing when, like I said, the first thing for me that I really liked about Industrial Edge was no one at Siemens knew that I was installing it. No one knew. Like when I first started messing with Industrial Edge back in April, no one at Siemens, I didn't ask them how to set up an IEM or how to set up an IED or how to deploy an application or how to build an application. All the documentation's there. It's like, I just don't know why you wouldn't look, I guess is the best way to put it. The big one for me was, I've found that a lot of companies who do this always try to get you to push the data to their cloud somehow. And Industrial Edge is, the app store is portable. You can put it in your cloud. You can put it in your OT network. It's basically wherever you need to put it. And that's a big differentiator. Like I said, there's a lot that brilliant engineers at Siemens, there in Nuremberg and other places, have done to make it a container a lot more manageable and a lot more observable by non-experts in containerization. And the work that they've done in cybersecurity is, like, the way that they implement the cybersecurity is just brilliant. I mean, it's all of the pieces that you need to, like I said, if you're thinking of doing it just by yourself, you should see what you're going to need to build. It's like I said, it's a really powerful tool. So I know that was a lot more than 2 sentences, and I apologize for that.
No, I love that. As Caleb and all of our long-term listeners know, brevity is not part of this show, which will bode very interesting for next week at SPS when we're on timers for most everything. But no, Caleb, I love that. I'm excited to continue these conversations as you continue down the Industrial Edge path on the Siemens side. I'm excited to go learn more and bring some of that knowledge back to North America, as Vlad and I are in Nuremberg next week with the Industrial Edge people. I've had, again, many conversations with them, and I'm super excited to learn more. At the price point, that might be the best value of anything in this entire industry. When you told me that it was $500 to start, my thought was, are they missing a zero, right? The value that they bring, $500 is an amazing price point for that.
Especially when you see all the apps you get for free, like all this, like they're not charging for IIH right now. Like that whole, and it by itself, it's worth more than that. I mean, but when you talk about device management and application management and at scale and secrets management and proxies and integrations and an API, a unifying API, and the ability to establish your own data model and integrate OPC-UA information models into it if you want to, it's like I said, it's a ridiculous tool for what they're charging. It's like I said, especially if that's all the further you go. Now, obviously, there are apps that they have that cost some. I even saw one that was like, it was like they will come and make a machine learning model for optimizing the tool path for your CNC machine for drill tap machines. And it's like $10,000 or something like that. Like there's a range of things that they have. And but like I said, to go and look at it and to evaluate it and connect it up to your control system and run your data through it and try to create some value. It is like I said, it's like 150 for an IEM, and then I think it's like $364 a year for a IE virtual device, and that's the very bare minimum you need to get started. And like I said, I don't know why you would need a PowerPoint presentation to look at it if you're trying to do this kind of thing in the factory. So, but
absolutely. No, I think all of those are great points, and I am interested to see what those announcements look like next week. And in a couple of years, we'll get back together and see if those pricings are still on the insanely great value or if they've started charging a bit more. But Caleb, I want to go ask you the question that I ask all of our guests. I want to ask you what you think that the future of this industry looks like in the next 2 to 3 years. Do you predict it's more tools like this? Do you predict we're going to take a hard left somewhere? What are your thoughts?
I think that I'll say, I guess the best way to say it is, I think that there is a necessity for us to figure this out, because I think of it as kind of, we are in industrial automation, we're the protectors of societal growth. And if we fail at our job, the first people to suffer are the poorest children, because we provide the services, the infrastructure that creates a modern society. So I would say that we kind of have to start embedding the context into the system, because we're losing the idea that some guy's going to come into your OT, your warehouse, and learn your process for 40 years. Like, that's not going to be a thing anymore. And so we have to embed this context into the system, or else it's not a given that technology moves forward. The reason why one of the fall of Rome had to do with people forgot how to operate and repair the aqueducts. It got worse. Technology got worse, and we're actually at a point of abstraction. With computers, where it's impossible for someone to know even a small amount of the overall information. And there are some things about technology that are moving backwards. There are some things in the infrastructure that was built it has a natural entropy. So I guess my prediction is that we're going to figure out the way to, we're going to take the next step. We're going to get past data collection. We're going to get to deeply embedding context into the system, which I think is the next step, which is kind of where digital twins come in, things like that. That and the system having the knowledge built in is really, really critical that we do in the next 5 years, because there will be meaningful impacts, societal impacts, if we don't because it starts to fly apart. And everyone's seen it when someone leaves that knew everything there was to know about a particular aspect to a system, and sometimes you abandon the system. Sometimes it takes a lot more money and time and effort to replace what that person could do. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 people. Sometimes you never can replace it. And so I'm genuinely very worried about us, as a group, not getting there, for whatever reason, because like I said, it's not like this is going to just, it's not like things are going to get better if we keep, if we just stay in the, mess around with, a new way to push data from the PLC to the cloud. We need to get past that step and move into the, the having the system be more aware of what it's doing, I guess is the best way to put it. And that is the thing that we have to solve, and it's on us to solve, because I don't know, I don't know that the next generation is gonna make it. They know, they have less subject matter expertise than the people who are here now, and they have less interest in general of understanding the subject matter. They're more wanting to interface with the technology and have novel technology. So one thing that a lot of people don't like containers and stuff because they think it's too complicated. They want to, the old maxim, keep it simple, stupid. Well, simple to who, right? The key is for us to understand that we are now caretakers of the, I'm sorry about this rant. We are caretakers of the well-being of society in many, many very meaningful ways. Whether you work in a factory that manufactures something, or you work with the utility grid, or you work with energy extraction and processing, it doesn't matter. If you're in this business, you're doing something critical and important for society. And so we got to figure it out, I guess, is the best way.
Absolutely. I think I guess that was not where I thought you were going to take the question, but I think it is a very honest answer to the question. And so I hope that we as a society, and more on the positive scale, opposed to we continue to make worse and worse aqueducts until we don't have water, end of the solution. So I thank you for that, Caleb. Next up, I think you've got both a book and some content recommendation for us this week.
Oh, yes. So honestly, I really liked there's 2 books I'm very, very, one is called How the World Really Works by Vaclav Smil. And he actually takes on different things that we want to do and determine, as a group, whether it's electrification of cars, things like that, and talks about what does it really mean, to have something like an electric combine. How does our infrastructure work today currently? And he actually breaks it down into energy conversions. When you're converting energy from one form to another, how efficient is it? How well is it stored? To me, it's a hugely important book because it helps to sort of, especially if you're in automation, it helps to sort of ground what you're doing. Like I said, this is a book that's, it talks about, how our society runs, everything from, steel and concrete, and the importance of nitrogen and ammonia, and the importance, to our well-being, to the running of our society. It's a very, I think it's a great book. I would say definitely read that book.
No, perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Caleb. Next up, some career advice. I know we briefly talked about soft skills. I don't know if the career advice is to continue down the soft hole, or you've got some other technologically focused career advice.
Networking, 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 networking. Um, Networking touches everything, including, certificates and PKI and VEF and proxy. If you're trying to mess with Kubernetes, or if you're trying to do Docker networks, or you're trying to do basically everything is essentially networking. So I would say, it's really hard to to me it's the skill, because it is the glue that makes everything else work, whether it's a field bus or a Kubernetes cluster or ingress controller or LTE or wireless communications, or firewall. It's the big point in IT/OT convergence that I don't think that you can't hack your way through that. You basically there's so many things that the network kind of governs and guides, and it's also the point where if you get hacked, that's where, if they're remote, that's where they're coming through the network. It's very important to understand networking, I'd say, especially layers 2 and 3. I know. Josh would probably say 4 and 7, but I don't know. Well, I'm not. I'll have to see what I would be interested to see what he says to that. But definitely networking.
Okay, I love that. I was going to mention, so anyone joining us now that missed last week, so last week, episode 142, we had Josh Varghese on. Josh is probably, I'm just going to call him the OT networking guru, the person that I think almost everyone I know calls if they've got questions in regards to OT networking. We also got super deep into the technical side on with Josh. Caleb, last question for you is, who should reach out? How can our listeners help you? Are you guys looking to hire? Are you guys looking for new customers? Are you looking to have interesting technology conversations? Kind of your open forum to ask our listeners to help you any way you want.
Yeah, I would say I'm always interested in talking to people about this stuff. I'm very, very interested in it. I would say if you're wanting to evaluate industrial edge, or if you're wanting to work with industrial edge, then I would say definitely talk to me. I've put a lot of effort into understanding how to do literally anything in it. But yeah, definitely it's, if you either have or want to put an edge computer out there and do something beyond what you can do with PLCs, then definitely reach out, because it's a very interesting topic. I give way more free advice than I should. But
I would say that is absolutely true. Caleb absolutely gives way more free advice than perhaps he should, to the betterment of the community, perhaps to the detriment of the bottom line of his organization. But Caleb, we all love you for that. And at that point, I'd like to say thank you, Caleb, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Manufacturing Hub episode 143. If you guys are not connected with Caleb, please go connect with Caleb on LinkedIn, which is where most of our listeners are, as well as Vlad and myself. Please follow Manufacturing Hub on. Hold on. We've got Chris who's making an edge pun. Thank you, Chris. Excited to work with you all to edgeify the world. A perfect edge pun to go ahead and close this. We will see Chris, and Chris will be on something at some point next week at SPS on the Siemens side. But no, guys, please go follow Manufacturing Hub on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. If you guys haven't found us on YouTube, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you made it this far on podcast form, please remember to go hit the like and the share. Rate us 5 stars where you can rate us 5 stars. Remember to follow so this downloads every Thursday when we've got new podcast episodes in your ear holes. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.